So one of the things that is probably my greatest skill set is helping a certain type of person understand Bitcoin. Not everybody. But I always go hard in the paint about sound money. I've written a series called Gradually and Suddenly. I think many of you probably know of it or read of it. But you know, a couple months. TM. But also, in part of my kind of journey of running the Houston Bitcoin meetup, Chad and I developed a friendship, and he's helped us a lot in Houston, helped us here at the Commons come and talk. But one of the things that he helped me understand is that, particularly when it comes to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, that you have to start with towns and people and community and jobs and infrastructure. When Chad executes on it, it really is a mission because authenticity is important. Chad, I just want to talk a little bit about your philosophy. Chad has also built and operated the largest, or one of the largest, if not the largest mines in the world, country. But it really started at a ground floor about caring about the community and caring about the things that matter to them. So could you talk a little bit about your philosophy there?
Thank you very much, Parker. And you're right. Like, I have a completely different philosophy than most people. And you'll hear me say this all the time. Look, Bitcoin, it's a widget. Set it on the side. For a moment, just don't think about it. And Parker and I have talked about this numerous times. If you sit back and you look at all the things that are very important, job creation, economic impact, sales tax collection, secondary job benefits, and you focus on the things that actually people will listen to. And I used to do the argument. You're like, oh, Bitcoin this and Bitcoin that. And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I was like, hey, do you have a 20-year-old son or daughter? I do. Oh, would they like a job in an industry that will teach them, train them, and then they can take those tools and go get a job at Dell? And they're like, well, yeah. And I was like, oh, well, I have this thing that's called Bitcoin. We're going to build this facility, and that's going to give the job training that I'm going to use the Texas Workforce Commission to create the avenue that brings that into your home. And then they start listening. And at the end of the day, this is a marketing problem. And just a minute ago up here, they were just talking about it. There's a marketing problem. Everybody has a different message they're trying to put out there, whether it's like, I have this proprietary widget and it's the super cool software and nobody gets to use it, or it's whatever it is. We should have one similar message. We have a product, it's called Bitcoin, and we create jobs and create economic impact in rural communities and change people's lives. And I've always been passionate about that. I was brought up in a household that you gave more than you took. And I just realized when I got to Rockdale, Texas, and I drove into that town and I looked around and I was like, this place looks like industry left. And as I got to know it and I got to know the people, and they would echo the same thing. Oh, my family worked at Alcoa for 50 years and they left and we don't know what to do. And oh, all the small businesses left. And oh, no one's interested in coming here. And I was like, hey, there's an angle. The angle is I'm going to go figure out how to use every possible incentive in the state of Texas so I can offset my cost and I can increase the value to that community. I had no idea when I started how personally impactful it would be for me. And then I became real passionate about it because it no longer became, I could care less about the money. I could care less about anything. It started saying, oh, I can put lights in this girls' softball field that for 20 years the school tried to do it. I can write a check. No, I can do one better than that. I can negotiate with the manufacturer. I can get somebody to do it for free. I can make the community raise money, and then every dollar they raise, I'll double it. And by doing that, I got everybody to buy into the idea. And so then that gave me the opportunity to bring in every congressman, the senators, every single person that somebody wanted to meet, I brought to Rockdale because I said, hey, I built this thing that you guys said I was going to fail at. And oh yeah, I did create the largest controlled load response first, the largest non-spin response, first. I did all these things first. I turned it off. You didn't ask me. I turned it off because I couldn't afford to run it. And when I started telling people, hey, I turned the power off because that's the only way I could pay the bill, because I raised the capital for that facility when Bitcoin was $3,100. People thought I was insane. I signed personal guarantees for everything. I was like, yeah, I don't care. If I fail, like, I'm going bankrupt. There is no way out. It's like, I'll agree to anything. And ultimately what happened was I created a simple recipe that I previously used in marketing, and I just applied. I like literally removed the widget of the product and put Bitcoin in it. I was like, okay, I need an audience. I need to be transparent and truthful. I need to tell them when I screw up, and I need to be open the doors and pull the curtains back. And in the very beginning, when I did that, people thought I had lost my mind. And everybody in this room can thank the tours in the Rockdale facility to a young 18-year-old by the name of Will Baxter. He happens to, he graduated from Baylor. He now works at EY in their Bitcoin sector, and he lives down the street from me in Dallas, and I had no idea. He was the first person that I gave a tour. And he's like, you should do this for everyone. And that's how it started.
Yeah, and I think that the tours of demystifying, because it wasn't just jobs, it was see the building, see the infrastructure, right? Like, that's real. And I think a big part of what you've done is not only help to build that community back, but you've helped to let everybody else see what it is you're building. And most people, I mean, many people in this room probably have been to Rockdale to have seen the tour, but when someone just says Bitcoin mining, there's not a mental model, right? And if they don't have a mental model, their mind goes directly to energy waste, because they don't understand Bitcoin, and they don't see the jobs and they don't see the infrastructure. And that part of actually opening it up and bringing the world in to see, it doesn't mean that people who already have a narrative aren't going to write about the story they want to write about. But that is the way that we win. One of the things that you talked about was, and kind of the timing was relevant, but as you're bringing hash rate online, the tax base, because the context was, and you mentioned it briefly, was that Alcoa left. This is a town of 5,000 people. There was energy infrastructure there to support a manufacturing plant. And as the jobs left, the tax base left. And when you think about a 500 megawatt, 700 megawatt site that that was being built into, 500, 700 jobs, and then the type of impact that has. So just talk a little bit about, because you shared what was actually happening, or maybe even to this day with the tax base, because that, when we think about this concept of rural revitalization and then how we get there, it starts with jobs. But then if politicians are sitting there, small towns that have the ability to help, that they care about what does it actually mean for their town, their infrastructure, their community spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. It's when you think about a large-scale facility, and I've made all kinds of little cheat sheet ways to figure out what's the true economic impact. So I've had multiple third-party studies done to tell me, like, the value. Like, you give them all the data, you show them all the money you spent, you show them the jobs you created, the value of the job, the price, that wage, what your average wage is, and all the things that are relationship to it. And what it's come down to is every citizen in a community, doesn't matter if they work for you or not, it benefits them, and I know this sounds silly, $12.63 a year of an economic impact to their life that they have no idea per megawatt. So if you have 750 megawatts times that, times the number of years that you're going to be there, times the number of people, it's $700 million. And so when you start thinking about those numbers and you're like, oh, okay, so you created, 283 full-time jobs, you created 450 full-time contractor jobs, meaning not necessarily somebody that directly worked for your company, but a company that moved there and brought their people. But more importantly, it created 2,300 secondary jobs. So that's 3 jobs for every megawatt you provided. 3 jobs, 3 real jobs. And so when you start thinking about Rockdale, Texas, they even went further back and understood that in their process, they're collecting 40% sales tax month over month, year over year, more than they ever have. When you start looking at that, I remember the county judge called me one day. He's like, I don't know what you're doing over there, but you need to stop. I'm like, what did I do this time, Judge? And he's like, I got to give money back to the state. And I was like, or do you just spend it? And he's like, I can't spend it fast enough. And when you start hearing those things, you really start understanding like the value of building large scale infrastructure and how you get rid of the stigma of like, you're this energy user, you're this horrible person, you're all these things. You're like, oh, I created a job training program for your 3 sons and your daughter, and now they're, computer techs. Oh, I used the Texas Workforce Commission to put a program in the high school to give people a segue, because I don't know if you know this, but I don't know the exact stats, but in rural America, I believe 80% of the graduating seniors are likely not to go to a higher education. They're not looking for that. They're now going in different directions. They're looking at vocational training and things like that. So you have the opportunity to create all these things, and that's the real impact, and those dollars are real. I mean, it's so real.
And I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was something like in the height of the government lockdown, Rockdale's tax base was increasing like 25% month over month because of all the hash rate that Riot was bringing online at the time.
It's even funnier. And it's funny, Facebook always reminds you of something. It reminded me of something the other day. And I remember I didn't know how to help people. And I sat there and I was like, hey, if we never, because at this point it's mid-March 2020, we're gonna turn on sometime in June, we're gonna run out of money. We're running out of money. There's no way we're not running out of money before June hits. And I'm like, if we're gonna run out of money, let's start taking full page ads out in the Rockdale paper and advertise every small business, every restaurant, help people learn how to build online sites so people can buy. And then we took out radio ads. And so when you start looking at that and then you hear that you increase the sales tax and you help these people, I was like, well, now I'm just inspired to figure out how to get the money to keep this thing going. I was like, we got to turn this thing on as fast as possible. So as we started ramping up our operations at the end of, the Texas lockdown, and in Rockdale, it was only kind of locked down. It was actually a nice place to live during that time. And when you think about it, and then you realize that the impact has been so great that other businesses now are there. There's other people building relative things to Bitcoin mining that offer services not in Milam County, it's Milam County, in Milano, Texas, that has 443 people. A Bitcoin repair center has moved into that town. 443 people live there. And it's the most bizarre thing to think about that. If you close your eyes when you drive through there, you're in and out of it on the other side. And they moved there because of the Rockdale facility. So you start seeing those things, and it really is impactful.
So we've talked a lot about this as really as a case study, which I think it will be looked back on as one of the great case studies that others replicate and model after. But when we think about this broader concept of rural revitalization, because it is, I think, I don't know what the statistic is, but there's something like 50,000 plants that have been shuttered in the United States, manufacturing plants. And it's not to say those facilities where they manufacture are going to be great places to mine Bitcoin, but there's power infrastructure. It kind of goes back to the last conversation of stranded energy or stranded power assets. Talk about the idea more broadly of rural revitalization in terms of where you see the opportunity and why you're so passionate about it, but then also how you see the scale to be able to replicate and what it is about rural America, which makes for such a great partner to Bitcoin mining.
No, absolutely. I think that's a perfect segue into this. And when you start thinking about it, everyone's asking me, well, what are you doing next, Chad? What are you going to work on next? What are you going to work on next? And I'll be candid. I want to build the largest decentralized data center ever. In order to do that, I have to build it across America. I have to build it in rural counties. I need rural infrastructure that's been shut down, that doesn't work for some reason. Whether the industry left, there's a problem. And there's an opportunity. And so when you start thinking about, how do you partner together multiple industries to benefit one another? So if you start thinking about, traditional data centers, now the move to immersion is happening so that you can condense your footprint. We have Midas is sitting here in right out there. I see him right there. Midas is sitting here, one of the immersion companies that works in Bitcoin mining. So if you look at that, so they can shrink the footprint down, and then you start thinking about battery storage. Then you start thinking about how you can arbitrage your energy uses using Bitcoin mining, and then create a training program that couples that entire thing. There is, if I'm not mistaken, just in the state of Texas, there's 500 locations that meet those qualifications of a population that's under 5,000, 5,000 and under, that meet every one of those qualifications that allows you to do exactly what I'm talking about. And when you forget about the fantasy, everyone like, oh, the world's being changed by AI. Well, it's already been changed. You just don't realize it yet. That compute is going to need somebody to manage its power price. Bitcoin mining is the perfect vehicle to do it. And there is USDA loans out there to build data and fiber in rural America, but like no percent. And they need it. You just have to you have to figure out how to change your thesis that allows you to check all the boxes to actually build that infrastructure. And it's out there, and I see it. I see it all over America. And I know that it's being done in Ohio right now. It's being done in Pennsylvania. I mean, somebody's trying to do it in just south of here, 100 miles south of here. And I see it every day. I've spoke probably to 45 companies in the last, 2 months. And they all have a similar idea. They just can't figure out how to put all the pieces together.
Can you talk a little bit about when you think about, so you kind of broad strokes described the number of potential different sites where there's opportunities in towns of 5,000 or less. When you think about what are the 1, 2, and 3 things that if you're looking at the next site or the next, just could you walk through, like when you looked at Rock Hill, obviously the Alcoa plant was there, and there was massive substations. But just talk a little bit about, like at a more granular level or more specific level, how you assess quality of sites, of where you think the opportunity is. First, it's a big opportunity, but more kind of blocking and tackling of, like, if I was to do 1, 2, or 3 more sites, where and how you would think about kind of the execution path.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it. The first thing I would do is I would identify every area that is outside of a city limit, especially in a state like Texas. It makes your ability for permit processing, permits go out the window if you're outside of a city limit. So 1A, you still have to build to the National Building Code, but immediately I would go to a rural area, 1. Number 2, I would identify what the tax abatement history has been in that town and what hurdles you have to go to get the greatest tax abatement on your business ad valorem tax. Because if you're building $50 million of infrastructure and you have $50 million of equipment, you have $100 million, you want that tax abatement for your ad valorem tax to be as little to zero as possible over the 10-year period while you're depreciating it. So that would be the next thing. Then I would identify and understand that if I had to build a facility to get the greatest sales tax credit, I would build a 100,000 square foot building, even if I didn't use the whole thing, even if I had to put a go-kart rink inside of there for myself all day long, because that is one of the clear things that you need to meet the Texas large data center sales tax credit, which gets rid of your sales tax on power. And to give you an example, you can do the math. Sales tax on 100 megawatts at 8% plus is a really, really simple scale of you saved yourself, hundreds of $millions over the life of a 10-year project. And so that would be the second thing I would do. And then I would go see how eager there was a community college within a 60-mile radius, so I could go to that community college and create adult training programs for continued education and to identify people that are in that region that need a segue to a good paying job. And the next thing I would do is make sure that my business plan allowed me to provide healthcare, 401ks, and continued education support for those team members. Because if you do what I said, what I outlined there, the tax abatement and the sales tax credit pays for every single employee. It cost you $0 in the end. And I remember in Rockdale, Lyle Terrio was one of the original guys that I started the company with in Louisiana, and he was like, hey, what do you mean we have to hire 150 people? It's like, yeah, we hire 150 people, we don't have to pay sales tax. And he's like, that seems expensive. We're like, do you know how much sales tax is going to be? I was like, do the math. What's $10 million? You 8.5% sales tax, you can do the math, right? It's like, that's not how much our payroll will be. He's like, oh, that makes sense. And I was like, yeah, you have to look at things that you can identify that are like hidden profit centers and use those profit centers to pay for the things that are required. You have to provide healthcare. You have to provide all these various things. So those are the first things I would do. And then I would go to those towns and I'd spend some time there. I'd make myself aware at the local gas station. I would start chit-chatting with people. I would go to the community center, all those things. I'd go to the dog shelter. I know that sounds crazy. I'd go to the dog shelter. And all those things are how you get people to buy into your idea.
Yeah, so on that idea, because I want to come back to the idea of community. Obviously, we spend a lot of time investing in the community here, and just how important that is, and how many good things can come, especially when it's genuine and authentic. And it relates back. I think I saw a tweet from you about culture. Just talk about, because it's one thing to talk about, hey, there's all this potential in, it's not just Texas, but all over the country, where a combination of energy infrastructure that's being underutilized, as well as economic deterioration that's happened because past companies have left. But how do you actually execute it from a company perspective? Obviously, that community becomes your company in terms of, it's actively people who are working on your team, but just in terms of kickstarting the flywheel to have a very virtuous outcome within a community like that. Talk about just company culture of how you think about actually executing, because it's not just showing up at the town hall meetings. It's a lot more than that.
That's a really great question, because I think people get the word culture wrong. And I think companies have a very difficult time figuring out what culture really is in a company. A lot of times it's like, oh, it's our four pillars of success. It's these 5 words that are on a wall. And I'm like, no. It's when Joe's car breaks down in the parking lot that you don't say, oh gosh, I hope you get that fixed. No, you stop and you help Joe fix his tire so he can get home to his family. You start demonstrating the value that you want people to have. And I think where companies go wrong is that they start with these incredible cultures. And I had the opportunity to have lunch the other day in Dallas with some people, and this particular person was telling me about how he's like, God, I want to get my company back to the beginning, back to the basics. And I was like, well, what's stopping you? It's like all this corporate stuff. And I was like, well, just change your rules. You're in charge, change the rules. And he's like, I remember when we were building our facility and across the street, I asked the farmers, what did they want? It was like, every time you cut your grass, cut my grass. I'm like, do you still cut their grass? I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, what else do you like about that? And he's like, I felt like I was part of something. And I think that's where the value comes in, is that people don't align with companies. They align with leaders they want to follow. And so if you can create an environment that people believe in, and what I did in Rockdale was very similar. I did go to the town hall and I did go to the city meetings and all those things, but I also went to the high school and flipped burgers in a school that had no kids. And I also showed up and bought posters of all the kids And when I found out only certain kids got school posters because their parents could afford it, I was like, well, how many kids are on the sports thing? Well, how many cheerleaders are there? How many people are sports trainers? Well, I want a poster of all of them. And I took my own money and I did it. And people are like, you've lost your mind. I was like, no, I want you to know that I actually care. I'm not doing any of this because I want you to let me work here. I'm going to work here anyway, but I want us to have a good relationship. And it's interesting that when you look back is I say that Rockdale was my greatest personal accomplishment because while I was there, I finally understood it wasn't about money at all. And watching people come to me, and it's still like earlier, my videographer, right? I don't work for Ride anymore, but my videographer was sitting here. He had no idea I was coming today, sent me a text message this morning, a picture of his brand new motorcycle. And he's like, I never thought I would ever accomplish this until you told me, stop being a mechanic, be the shop manager, and help people be successful. And he literally wrote it in the text to me. And when I read it and I saw him, he's like, man, if I knew you were going to be here, I would have told you in person. I was like, that's the greatest text I've had in 6 months. Because it shows that I instilled this passion in somebody that learned that he always thought of himself as a mechanic. Then I taught him, like, don't be a mechanic, and because he was like, oh, I like to work on things. No, be the shop manager and help other people be the mechanic. And I think that's really important. And I think that's the key. That's how you do it. You have to find out whatever your passion is, and you have to show other people by doing, not by telling. And I think that's when I say get the words off the wall and actually live it every day.
Yeah, and I think that I'm going to ask one last question. My phone's dead, but I think we're getting to time. It's about 5. Is that, there's a lot of people, there's kind of a running joke in Bitcoin. Someone will come and say, oh, there's somebody who wants to buy a ton of Bitcoin, and you're always like, yeah, this person's probably not real. And then there's people who say, oh, I want to go build a 500 megawatt facility. That Chad is one of the few people in the world who's actually built it and run it. And that I've fully bought into, especially when you're going and talking to small rural communities where you might be coming to actually deliver some real good to them, that you sit down and you talk about, hey, let me tell you about this thing, Bitcoin, to get you to buy in, that's not the path, that we're going to bring jobs and we're going to do what we say we're going to do. But if you could just to wrap up, talk a little bit about how you've seen that community change and what Bitcoin means, how they respond to it now that they're literally there building and producing and hashing and gaining a better understanding on the back end of what it is that they're actually helping to secure and how it's impacting their lives.
That actually is another great question. You're really good at this. You ought to do this full time. Like when you really think about it, it's like if you think about the security guard, right? So we have, we created a security company, and the security guard had no idea, and now they're reading about it. Like we always took the approach when we first started the company. It's like, look, you don't, like, we're building stuff. Like, can you build stuff? Cool, come build stuff with us. And along the way, they're like, well, what does the machine do? And you explain it to them. And then, my youngest son, Ashton Harris, was the CTO of Windstone, and he always did a great job explaining why it was important. Like, hey, you're doing this work and you're creating this value, and here's what it does. And slowly but surely what started happening is that it became infectious. We taught people how to, and as crazy as this sounds, we taught people how to open up bank accounts for the first time. We taught people how to buy stock. Like, oh, you want to buy stock? We taught people how to do it. Oh, you want to buy Bitcoin? Let us show you how to do it. Oh, and so what started happening is in a rural area where we had team members who work for us that had never had a bank account. They learned how to do banking. Then they learned how to buy stock. Then they started buying Bitcoin because they were like, hey, I like the idea that I get to carry it with me. We're like, we don't suggest that at all. We don't suggest it at all. Don't do it. But what started happening is it became infectious. The prerequisite for a tech in Bitcoin mining to work on the machine. It was like, you play video games, we got the job for you. And so that's how we kind of recruited kids that were gamers. And then they learned how to fix the machines. And then they learned what it actually did. And then they started understanding the value of their work and how it impacted the company's bottom line. And then I would say one of the proudest things that I helped promote was that every single employee got a performance bonus based on the company's results on a quarterly basis. And it was because one day I was like, well, just take my stock from me. I don't want it. You're going to take it from me anyway. I don't want it. Give it to everyone that works here. They're the ones that do the work. They do the work. They deserve it. And so what started happening was that people started understanding that when they mined X number of Bitcoin a month, they got X. And it became a real correlation between like real life for them. And I think that's probably how rural communities in the future will be able to go, look at this example. Here's what happened. Here's the dollars that were invested. And here's the outcome. And I think the outcome is growing, and it's interesting that for the first time ever, a new subdivision is being built in Rockdale, Texas, with 600 new homes, and affordable housing, and a new middle school is being built. And when I got there, they're like, there's no homes to buy, you can get a trailer. And I was like, and I lived in a barn, right? And so you kind of look at that evolution over like a 3.5 year period. You're like, it went from nothing to now they're building a new subdivision. And it's awesome, and it's great to see that, and I can't wait to do it again.
God bless you, Chad.
Yes. Chad, one, thank you for what you've done for Bitcoin. Two, whatever you're going to do next. And then three, if there's anybody out there that has a reckless idea of building a 500 megawatt mine, you probably can't do it, and you should just talk to Chad.
No, you should do it. Yeah, just pretend it's going to be painful.
Well, Chad, if you would you, while I say my things, will you just stay up here? Just so I can go through these. So one, we're going to break, wrapped up the day. We're going to have a happy hour here for about the next hour and a half. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank again everyone who's helped make this happen. Particularly, I'm not sure if she's in here, she might be outside, but Kaylee Buemi, who helps run the Bitcoin Commons. Please give her a hand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot has gone into planning this. All the folks who spoke, I'm not going to be able to rattle off all their names, but we've had 20 speakers here that have not only devoted their time and energy into Bitcoin, but to come here and speak. My hope is that everybody who leaves here leaves with greater intentionality of what they're going to do, and I hope many people who are newer to Bitcoin that are here have learned. I hope the people who know a lot about Bitcoin are motivated to go do more, and also to use this time to meet more people, to build relationships, to deepen knowledge, and then to go forward and educate. So that's what we try to do here at the Bitcoin Commons, and we have a tagline that will be coming out, a new advertising campaign in Bitcoin Magazine, who's one of our partners, that it's a model for a nation, and it's the Bitcoin nation, and that these type of venues in terms of forums and then events, that more of it will happen, not only all over this country, but all over the world. It's a grassroots movement, and that's how we win. So, Chad, thank you. Everybody who participated, not only in terms of speaking, but coming here and giving your time. Thank you for being here. These type of events do move the needle. So we're going to win, and let's get some cocktails.
Thank you.